Oh, we had a lovely rooster crow to get us
Oh,
started for this sanctuary panel. How perfect was that?
that's Wendell. He's saying hi.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so we're going to get our chicken micro sanctuary panel started. Just a reminder that Annie Potts was not able to join us. She had to cancel for personal reasons. But we are blessed that some wonderful sanctuary founders were willing to come and join us for this sanctuary panel. And, I'll just say that I think one of the main reasons we're here today, right, is to dispel some of the myths. So one of the reasons we do this webinar is to dispel some of the myths around chickens that they, aren't cognitively or emotionally complex. And well, the people that we have on this panel today, they know chickens. They've lived with chickens. They know them deeply and intimately. So we're going to get to hear the truth about who chickens are. And Fireweed is going to be co-hosting with me. Fireweed, did you have some opening thoughts about the panel as well before we introduce everybody?
Well, maybe I'll just say how delighted I am to be part of the 2024 Chicken Webinar Hope, particularly in honor, in memorial of our beloved Karen Davis, who sadly just passed away this past year. I can't help but imagine how absolutely thrilled Karen would be to know that we've all come together today to honor the birds that she devoted her life to. So very pleased to be participating. Thank you so much.
Yes, and it is International Respect for Chickens Day, a day of action that Karen founded. And so we can continue that tradition of speaking out and respecting chickens, speaking out for and respecting chickens. Okay, so we're going to start our panel. We have Tamara Brown, Tracey Glover, no, Tracey, yes, Tracey Glover, yes, and Alistair Van Cleek. And they're going to kind of introduce themselves more about them. So instead of reading bios, let's hear from them. So if you all would please introduce yourselves, maybe what's the name of your sanctuary and where it's located. And then, anything you'd like to say, maybe how many animals in your care, or anything else briefly about your activism or your sanctuary. Okay. Tracey, why don't you start?
Sure, thank you. I guess, yeah, if I can just say too, first of all, just thank you so much for doing this. I'm so honored to be here. That was an amazing presentation. So much, incredible information. Just thank you for making this all happen. My name is Tracey Glover. My sanctuary is Sweet Peeps Microsanctuary. I am in Lillian, Alabama. We are in Lillian, Alabama, which is kind of in between Mobile, Alabama, and Pensacola, Florida, so deep, deep south. We currently have 26 chicken residents. We also have a lot of cats running around here, mostly former ferals, and one very, very good dog who gets along with them all. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to tell you more about the animals here. To talk more about what we do. But I try. This is like the heart of everything I do. This is the most personal work that I do, without a question. It's what motivates me to do everything else. I try. I also run a small animal rights group out of Mobile. We've actually done we did a chicken webinar, which a few of you were a part of at some point. So I do a lot of writing. I don't get it out to as wide an audience as I'd like, but I'm always trying my best to advocate for these animals, for a vegan world, but really trying to center the conversation on these animals because they are the most abused land animal on earth, and I think the most undervalued of all the animals that we talk about. So stop it there. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Tracey. And Tracey has written some wonderful books as well. Or you have a children's book coming out too,
I
right?
do. June
Yeah.
30th publication date. Chickens are animals too. Fannie Goes to Washington. So yeah.
Look for that. It's awesome.
I want to see it.
All right. Tamara, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, no, my name's Tamara, and our sanctuary, I wasn't very creative with the name, so we just went with the Browns Micro Sanctuary, maximum cleverness. But yeah, no, we're in Ontario, Canada, maybe like an hour from Toronto. just yeah, and we have currently, I want to say only 29 chickens, but because we kind of go from like an average of like 45 to 55, but you know how it is sometimes when you like rescue a large number at once and then they all get older at once and then yeah. So anyway, no, we've had some like heartbreaking losses recently, but no, so my we I grew up with chickens as like pets. I don't want to say that word, but you know, my mom grew up with them as pets as well, so she can kind of be to blame. um, and so when we moved out to this property, there was already kind of like a chicken coop on the property, so it kind of just was like a natural thing. But then I basically took over and started learning about things. Like I remember when I was young, and my dad had this like farmer friend, and we got he called these sorry like called them bare ass chickens, and I just was like, oh okay. And then when we got them, they looked beautiful, but then I later learned without knowing that those were like battery cage hens that he just got from an auction. And anyway, so you kind of, but like even then I had blinders on. It wasn't until later on then that like you start to learn, and then when you start to learn, then you definitely get more into like rescue and trying to do what you can with what you have, and become more of an advocate. So that's kind of how it's evolved for us. It was never really a decision to be like, I'm gonna do a sanctuary. It was just like this just happened in a way. So, but yeah, no, we do lots of different kinds of advocacy. I think Tracey, you even got some of our diapers that we can sell, sewing up for people. Yeah, like just little random things that like things that I can do with what I've got to help animals in need. So yeah, lately the biggest thing that we've had is like Steve and Margaret, our chickens here, have been blowing up on like social media, like all over the place, and just trying to manage like even that. I just had to shut off the phone because like the comments are getting a bit like too much. So I'm trying to figure out how to best use that because yesterday, so I mentioned before we started recording, but yesterday, so my mom works in a nursing home, and one of the ladies that she works with is very with it, but like she's kind of like physically there, but she's in love with Steve. So we thought, okay, we're nearby. Let's just take Steve to visit her. That'll make her day. And Steve was such a good boy. You would all be so, so proud of how he was just like so many people came from all over. The plan was just to visit through the window, but then everybody just was like, look at him. He's beautiful. And he was so good. And there was one, I'm figuring off, but he was just so good. I have to brag. He was like, we kind of had him perched in this one lady's wheelchair yesterday, and she just was so, and she had like a calming presence, and Steve kind of fell asleep on her chair. But I guess this lady was being difficult for the nurses yesterday, and then after Steve came, she was just brilliant for them. So anyway, the interesting part about when we were there is like so many people who didn't work directly with my mom were just like, that's Steve, I know him from the internet, and just like making these like connections with him from like people who are outside the sphere, because I think all of us kind of know that that's the hardest thing to penetrate. So I'm trying to figure out more about how I can be better at that, like I got to focus more on that. But I'm also like trying to answer emails about getting diapers shipped internationally and stuff like that, because I know that's important too. So yeah, no, I had a history with like working in politics and environmental advocacy too. So I kind of feel like the policy side of things I should be working on. Like, you know, I think we're all pulled in many directions, but priority is always caregiving for the individuals and doing that. So yeah, I thought I'd sit outside with them because it's beautiful, but I have
Yeah, that's great. I love that you're right there with them and we can hear and see them. That's wonderful. Yeah. Great. All right, wonderful. Well, so let's move to our third panelist, Alistair Van Cleek. And of course, they're the co-founder of the Humane Hoax Project. And I will say the technical wizard behind the scenes here of the webinar. We had tech issues last webinar because at our Humane Hoax online conference because they were not there. So I'm so grateful that that they're here today and helping, and because everything's going smoothly because of them. So Alice,
no jinxes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Alistair Van Cleek. My partner Roz and I co-founded Triangle Chicken Advocates Sanctuary back in 2014 in central North Carolina. And then shortly after that, we started the Microsanctuary movement, which became the Microsanctuary Resource Center. So we've been working to do rescue, caregiving, and education about chickens, both hens and roosters, especially roosters. We love roosters. As well as doing the Microsanctuary Resource Center to help get support to other chicken sanctuaries and sanctuaries of all sizes around the world. And we've been doing that since 2015. So yeah, so I'm excited to talk more about chickens.
Fantastic. Fireweed? Did you have a question? Unmute yourself, I think.
There we go. All of our discussion earlier, what a fantastic presentation, Crystal, by the way, about chickens as, you know, this enormous mass of beings on the planet, I think does tend to obscure the individual nature of these unique birds. So we thought it might be a perfect opportunity for Microsanctuary folks to actually focus on those individual personalities. So we wondered if you'd have perhaps any information to share about chickens as individuals, perhaps how they may have surprised you, or what you think would surprise others to learn about individual chickens. Maybe Tracey, do you want to start?
Sure, you will just have to shut me up because I could talk all day. I mean, when I think,
And maybe I'll say to that, maybe we'll put maybe just like a 5 minute on everyone, and we'll let you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
please do let me know if I go too long. It is my favorite thing in the world to talk about. I mean, I guess if I could just sort of preface it a little bit by saying that, like, this is the reason actually that I decided I wanted to rescue chickens. Like, I didn't actually set out when I took in my first group, and I would love to tell you a little bit about them. I hadn't decided up until I saw a post about them. I didn't know I was about to take in my first chickens, but in the back of my mind for a long time, I knew that one day I wanted to rescue chickens or live with chickens and get to know them better, because I knew, the thing about them being, 9 out of the 10 billion land animals that we kill every year in this country for food are chickens. They're the most abused. I knew this about them. It was part of why I went vegan to begin with. But even as like a 15-year vegan, I shared a lot of the misconceptions about chickens. Like, I also kind of assumed that they were like too stupid to feel, which makes no sense on any level, besides the fact that, of course, that they're not stupid at all. Like, intelligence has nothing to do with suffering. There's so many misconceptions wrapped up in that. But so I knew that I knew I was missing something. Like, somehow at least I knew that much. And I knew that if I knew them better, I would be a better advocate for them. And I can't even express how much I feel that that's true. I mean, again, I would like so much to scale up my advocacy and help them on a much bigger level. And I hope one day, to be able to do that, or somehow to be able to do that, because now that I know them as individuals, like, what we do to them is so much more, just emotional. I mean, it's like really understanding. So a couple of maybe individuals I recently, I want to talk maybe a little bit about a rooster who I recently lost, Purusha. He was, I had been living in a suburb in Mobile when I took in my first group of chickens, and I kind of had to move because I was living like in an HOA that limited me to 4 animals. And by the time I took in the first group of chickens, along with the cats and dogs I had like 22 animals. So I moved out to the country. As soon as I moved here, like, I think before I even had my furniture here, I had agreed to take in 10 Kaporos survivors. So probably most people here know what Kaporos is, but it's this like horrible religious ritual that takes place every year in Brooklyn. Karen Davis was very involved in helping to end that and rescuing the survivors. There are, I think, so, brave activists every year go and rescue hundreds of them and are always looking for homes. I took in 10 that first year. Purusha was one of them. He was one of the first roosters I ever had, because when I was living in the suburbs, I couldn't have roosters. From the beginning, he was just like, they like when they first get here, they're all, so I'm sorry, most of my chickens are rescued from the meat industry. So most of the chickens here, all but one right now, are Cornish crosses. So they're the big white birds. They're the broiler chickens. And every time I've taken in like a group, at first they all look the same, which is part of, I think, why we have a hard time relating to them as individuals, is because they all kind of look the same. Like, they're all white, big white birds. Once they've been here for a while, then I could pick each one out of a flock of a million. Like, they're so, their little faces are distinct, their combs are distinct, their personalities are distinct, they have like birthmarks on their legs and stuff. But so Purusha like stood out from the beginning as just kind of being like the wise man. He was just always like very calm, and when the spring hormones first hit, he was like not interested in fighting at all. He used to, as a baby, he would like jump up on my back and pull my pigtails. It always made me just think of like, like an adolescent boy who was like trying to get a girl's attention. And he developed some like foot infection that we battled for years and couldn't resolve. We were back and forth to the avian specialists at LSU, which is about 4.5 hours each way from here. I mean, he really got the best veterinary care that I think was available, and we just couldn't battle this infection. Eventually, he moved into the house because we had to take more care of him, and eventually he had his leg amputated. At that point, he was so dependent on me and other caregivers here, but it gave us this opportunity to know each other, like in the I mean, better than I have known most human beings in my life. And the more that I got to know him, the more I saw the incredible like range of emotion, an intelligence that you could just see, like any intelligent being could identify it just from looking into his eyes. But it was just so clear he had so many like preferences. Like I would put a bowl of fruit in front of him. He was also, though, it's like, with people, like he would have moods. Like I'd put a bowl of fruit in front of him, and he would, some days he would like be like, ick mango, and he'd pick it up and he'd throw it out like he was like irritated with me, and he'd just eat the apples. And then like the next day I'd give him a bowl of apples, and he would look at me like, where's the mango? And then I would give him mango, and he would eat it all up. And we got to a point where we could really, I knew what he wanted. He knew how to communicate with me. I set my timer for 5 minutes, and that went so fast. But I guess just to like summarize real quick about Purusha, at least, is like he sometimes got frustrated, just like people do. He was so sweet. He loved to be held. He loved to have his like face stroked. He would just nuzzle into my arms. He took all of the care that we had to give, like poking him to give him fluids and injections. He would look like he was so interested, like, what are you doing? And then he knew he was safe. Like so few chickens have this experience, but like he knew he was safe, and he would just settle into my arms. He loved to watch videos of sea turtles in particular. His eyes would just light up. I could really talk about him all day long. I will stop myself with that.
Thank you so much, Tracey. It's really wonderful to have met him through your story, but I am really so sad for your loss.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. If I could just say too, if you go to our website or our Facebook page, you'll see lots of videos and photos of Sweet Purusha. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to interject very quickly. I don't think a lot of people realize how much chickens do love to snuggle and even purr like a cat, right? I mean, with their contented coo, it's just such a joy to hold them. Over to you, Alistair. Would you like to share a little bit about individual chickens that you've gotten to know and love?
Yeah, I mean, we've rescued hundreds of chickens over the 10 years that we've been doing this. And so, I mean, I can speak individually, but just try to make it quick. I think for me, the biggest surprise, just generally speaking, has been the personalities of roosters. There is no other animal that is so misunderstood and maligned, both in general culture and even within vegan circles. People really have these preconceived notions of who roosters are and kind of how they navigate the world. And so for me, very quickly after we started TCA and started working hands-on with roosters, it was very quickly obvious just how mistaken those preconceptions are. And so we've been doing rooster-only flocks of various sizes since shortly after we started, and it's something that's kind of an art more than a science. But we've really learned over the years that roosters are so much more interested in nurturing and protecting and finding and establishing and maintaining social bonds with their flock mates. They're we seem to think culturally that roosters just want to fight constantly, and that they're out for blood and will kill on sight. But really, roosters in reality are so much more than that. And so in one of our earliest roosters, a rooster named Zooey was the first rooster who was kind of the leader of our large rooster flock. And he managed to oversee a group as large as up to 40 roosters with perfect placidity and just the most zen rooster I've ever met. But he was also just, the most amazing individual who had his friends and also kind of watched out for everyone. And then we also had a rooster we lost a couple years ago named Salem, who was with us since shortly after we started. And he spent his entire life with us, and pretty much his entire life after he reached maturity with other roosters, and just really saw the way in which he, his life was so much about his relationships with his rooster friends. And there wasn't any sense of that, oh, well, he really needed a hen in order to be a rooster. No, it was the fact that he had these bonds and these flock mates that he shared his life with. And that was what was most important. And so I think, in all of our work with TCA, I think for us, like, just understanding that roosters are so much more interesting and complex than our society wants to present them as. And the better that we understand that, I think the more we can understand the ways in which all farmed animals and all beings, on the planet we share, have these very rich, interesting, and dynamic social and emotional lives. And, where it would be best if we try to respect that as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Alistair. And I think certainly all of us here know and understand that
Yeah.
roosters are cast away every day. And all the sanctuaries I'm aware of are usually pretty full at the end, And people really understood how the backyard chicken movement has increased the pressure on all of us who care about animals. Roosters really are at the top of the list of the most unhomed and neglected, certainly of the farmed animal sector, I think. Tamara, you've had some
Yeah, no.
recent exposure on was it, I forget now what little clip that was going around with a couple from your place at Brown Sanctuary
It was
there.
and the dodo, right?
Was
Yeah,
it the
there's a
dodo?
few.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like
So why don't you
one,
tell
I
us a
think,
little bit about your chickens?
yeah, well, like, so those two, Steve came here when he was abandoned as a day-old chick. It's the same problem. Like, somebody dumped a whole bunch of roosters in a park in London, Ontario. So it's about an hour from here. We didn't know any of that was going on at the time. We just got a message. I saw a message on Facebook from a couple who was just going on a stroll saying they found a baby bird. They weren't sure it was a chick, but flies were circling and they were needing to get help. It was a long weekend, so none of these places were open. I knew it was a chick, so I was like, stick him in your bra and get him here. Like, is what I said. Like, get him here quick, keep him warm, please. Just they got here so fast. It's like at least an hour 15 drive. I think they made it in like 45 minutes. It was crazy. So yeah, he got here and that little guy grew up in the house with us because it was winter and stuff. And he, as anybody like with roosters know, they really can form deep bonds with you. And he basically kind of grew up in the house. Margaret eventually came to us after she was bitten leg by a weasel. The family had them for like eggs, but they were like a loving family. And then so they were able to like grab the weasel off as it was happening. But then they weren't quite sure how to manage it. Margaret got really sick. She stopped walking. She stopped eating. Thankfully, they reached out to us. We got her to the emergency vet. We got her like did tests to figure out exactly what was going on. Once we got the right antibiotics, she was like up and walking again. But she needed to be tube fed and all of that goes with it. So it did take a bit. But anyway, while she was in the house in our little house hospital getting treatment, Steve was sneaked downstairs and we were trying to like quarantine, but the little guy just like door was open a crack. He'd go down. He'd be like, "There's ladies, I gotta go see them." And he would dance for her. And I think ever since then, Margaret was just like, "This guy is so hot and so greedy," and they're just stuck together forever. Like their two are just. And then everybody's like, "Oh." The one frustrating thing I think anybody with the sanctuary would hear is like, "Oh, you have to have so many hens per rooster," and then we all know what that means with the surplus roosters. But Margaret is like, "I'm not letting any of you come near my man. That's my guy." It's too funny. They're so like very, very different. Like this whole question was about individual personalities, and there's Margaret is like funny. She's the boss. That's her man. They'll all stick together. Anybody who comes close, she's like, "Go away, go away," and then the other hens run off. But Steve, because he grew up in the house. And then the other thing I don't think many people know about his story is like when he first got here, it was all really quick. Like I was still cleaning everything, trying to get it ready for a little chick because we don't really get chicks very often. And he got here so quick. My mom was here, so I was just like, "Please hang on to him, keep him warm. I'm still getting it ready." So she had him like under her neck, keeping him warm on her little recliner. And ever since then, I feel like Steve recognizes that as a safe place because that's where he has to get into sleep every night. He sleeps on the back of this chair in the living room where he first went when he first got there. And it's like everybody in the comments on these videos about the two of them are like, "Why do you separate them at night?" And I'm like, "I don't." Margaret goes to bed. He waits at the door. And as soon as I open the door, he runs right up to the house and gets right up on the back of the recliner. And then more than that, like this morning, so now lately, every morning, Steve, because he wants, I think he sees us as part of his flock too, or maybe that's just my thinking, but he wants to be with you. He'll climb up the stairs every morning and actually jump into bed with me because he gets up earlier than I could possibly manage. And he'll just sleep there, like alongside me. And it's like the sweetest thing. So yeah, and all these people who are like, roosters are loud, roosters are loud. I'm like, I sleep literally through it with like him right there. Some days he's like extra loud and I'm just like, no, but he's too cute, so I can't move him. So no, he is a doll. And like, yeah, but then like everybody is also very different. We also have Wendell, who I also say is a doll, but Wendell's like, I like to just stay away from you. That's just my thing. But we love him, and he's 8 years old already somehow. Like, so lucky to have him. The other thing about Wendell is all the ladies love Wendell. Like, that's the like any hen that comes to us who's a little like, they don't need anybody rough, but Wendell's the guy. They all love him. He's so gentle. He's so caring. He's such a sweetheart, but he's like, oh, I just keep my distance from the human. So it's like, I'm so glad that we have him. Yeah, I love them all. The other thing, like people were talking about with hens, one of the things we learn is just with the sanctuary is just how prone to health issues they are and how severe they are. And I think a lot of people don't really fully realize that if they're not doing the direct care. And because what happens with hens is like they hide symptoms. It's like a natural response to not show that you're sick. But then when they finally get to the point where they do show it, it's usually because they're past the point where they just can't hold it anymore, and they'll usually pass afterwards if they're not getting care. So oh sorry, this is me also saying don't go on for super long.
Okay.
And yeah, that was kind of my whole point, was to say that's something I think we're also trying to show, is to like get hens medical care. And when you do that too, you also really, I think they learn to trust you, and those bonds that you have with the ones that have gone through medical things are just like extra because they've been vulnerable, so now they really fully trust you. And yeah, it's quite another thing to just go through that with somebody and to form those bonds when they're like, yeah, going through that.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I think that the next question I really kind of wanted to ask around how the chickens come into your care. And I think this can kind of segue into our Humane Hoax concepts in our Humane Hoax project, because you'd think that probably most animals at sanctuaries come from, the big industrial, but those chickens are very hard to get a hold of. Usually they come out deceased. They're not, not coming out to be rescued. So many of the residents I know in smaller micro sanctuary and chicken situations come from more small operations, or there was a question about backyard chickens, things like that. So can you talk a little about how the animals come into your care and why there's such a need to rescue all these chickens? Maybe do we want to go in the same order? Maybe Tracey could start. Or actually it wasn't the same order. Maybe we'll break it up. Let's go Alistair.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I work with a lot of sanctuaries around the world, and I think I can speak pretty broadly in saying that sanctuaries aren't going out and trying to get animals. They're mostly dealing with people asking us to take animals that they no longer want. And so that means that the vast majority of requests that we sanctuaries get to take in new animals is coming from small backyard farms. Large, industrial scale farms aren't typically reaching out to sanctuaries to deal with their animals. It's not cost effective. It's complicated for dealing with biosecurity protocols. It's complicated for dealing with their legal situation, just vis-a-vis state regulations. So even dealing with small scale backyard farms, sanctuaries are full and typically can't take people and don't do owner surrenders. And so I think there's this myth that sanctuaries exist to help factory farmed animals and animals coming from these large rescue operations. But in reality, the truth on the ground is that the largest number of animals that we have to deal with, whether that be requests or actual intakes, are going to be coming from small operations. And we very quickly were up at capacity when we started, just looking at animals who've been surrendered from small local backyard farms to animal shelters, and people who are asking us to help them with animals they couldn't care for any longer.
Tracey?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, totally to echo what Alistair said, that we are not looking to take in more animals ever, but I am inundated with calls from people who primarily have oops roosters. It's that thing with backyard chickens in particular, right? People want to have backyard chickens because they want eggs, and sometimes it's about like regulations, rooster bans and that sort of thing. But also it's this, people have this idea that for every like one rooster, you want 8 hens or, something like that. But very, very few people will have an equal number of roosters and hens. Most people have either like only hens or a really strong hen heavy ratio. And like I've heard Alistair say, I think on a number of occasions, like for every hen, like where's the brother? And a lot of people will go ahead and slaughter their roosters, but there are a lot of people who, they want backyard chickens for eggs. They're not interested in slaughtering animals, but they want to they want to hatch chicks because chicks are cute. And they'll either hatch chicks, and then but 50% of the chicks who hatch are going to be roosters. And the other half will be hens. And people often just I don't know, they don't think that far ahead. I also know people though who they do think ahead, and they just know that whatever roosters they end up with, they will send to, like, I've had somebody say, the rooster guy, and what's going to happen to them. So I think, people who are like, who want to do the right thing, who don't want to hurt the roosters, they will reach out to rehome them. But like Alistair said, my small little sanctuary, if I took in all the roosters that people call me about, I would have had like hundreds within the first year. And also, when you're giving chickens the care that they actually deserve, which is like on par with the care that a dog or a cat deserves, they live, even like the Cornish crosses who I rescue. People think that they can't live to be more than like a year old or something. My oldest Cornish crosses are 5.5, and they all receive the same level of veterinary care that a dog or a cat would. And so, they have like pretty long lifespans relatively. They require a lot of resources to give them the proper care. And so yeah, I mean, the backyard chicken industry, by definition, it's creating, I don't know how many, I don't know what the number is, but for every hen you see, there's a rooster who is getting dumped or slaughtered. Or so the backyard chicken industry is completely inhumane and unsustainable.
Thanks, Tracey. Tamara, how have you been getting your residents? What is your intake like, and how does that affect chickens?
Oh, I think we probably have like maybe one of the widest varieties of sources. Like, I think if I can't tell for sure, I think that's Louise over there. Louise came from a research study for behavioral research from the University of Guelph nearby. So thankfully the student researcher was like a vegan actually, and made sure they all got into homes. But this, I guess, when they do studies on them, they do the study, then they kill them because even the vets rule, or the school, they're not the vets, but they thought that nobody would want Cornish crosses as pets, so they just wouldn't even bother. But that was like an industry study sort of thing. This little hen over here was one of those things. I don't know if there's a problem beyond here, but there's a problem with like these companies that rent out baby chicks, and then when they get to a certain age, they go back to the farms. There's also been a huge problem with ducklings, but this little girl that's behind me here, Avi, she was somebody went up to one of those anonymous for the voiceless activism things and said, "Oh, I feel really bad. I got this chicken home," and then they explained what it was. When they realized what going back to the farm meant, they're like, "We don't want to do that." So she came here, and I'm grateful for that. Steve, I think I mentioned, was found abandoned in a park with a whole bunch of other roosters that were dumped that day. And that's one thing I don't think people talk about, the cruelty of the backyard chicken network, because one thing I often hear how they deal with roosters is either, well, we all hear like freezer camp, but also feeding the wildlife when they dump them out in the woods. And you'll see like if people are lucky to hear about them, and you'll hear like sanctuary people like frantically trying to go and get them, because we know Yeah, I'm still haunted. Like a year ago, we tried to get this one boy, and it was in such a thick, dense place we couldn't get him. We were getting stung by wasps trying to get this poor boy. I committed to like going back as soon as I could, and nobody saw him after that. And it haunts you, right? And you can't get them. Actually, we did get a number from industrial factory farms, so ones out of battery cages. There's a sanctuary near here, Cedar Row. They had made connections with people in the farms, and they made a deal so that the day before they would be sent to slaughter, they would find a number of homes ahead of time, say we can take in 100 birds and get them home. So I always would feel pressure to say, okay, we need to have enough room ready to get as many as we can out, because you know what would happen otherwise. And so we would go, but then the pandemic hit, and I guess my understanding is now they don't release them; they just gas them all instead. So we can't get them out from there at the moment, and that's killing me. But yeah, most of ours do come from backyarders, like surrender. Some of them aren't all bad. Like this, or my little Elsie. She's I don't know if you can see, she's like little and black, but her family had a bunch of chickens. They weren't going to have chickens anymore, and they loved her. They wanted her to go to a safe place, but they didn't want her to be alone, so she came here to be with friends. So sometimes it's sweet, like it's not always horrible. Like you can't really deny people like that when you're like they do have best intentions for their chicken, and it's rare. Um, some sometimes, yeah, like a lot of our boys were just like found dumped somewhere. A lot of there's like spent hens that you'll hear, so people are finding things where they're like they know chickens are going to be killed if they can't find a safe home, because once they get past a certain age, then people don't want them for eggs anymore. So that's always a problem. There's so many ways we've gotten them. Edith, my other Cornish cross, was actually going to be fed to a snake. She was from like almost a victim of the pet industry. So she was a day old chick. Somebody was going to feed her to this guy. Was really gross. The snake didn't want her. Snake was a good boy. And then this family showed up to buy something off a classified thing, and they saw a little brown paper bag that was peeping. And they were like, "What's that over there?" And he said, "Oh, it's this chick. My snake didn't want her, so I'm going to film myself taking a hammer to her." And the family was like, "Please don't." Like, well, they kind of saw this guy's vibe, and we're like, "We have a tarantula at home, so let's like we're going to do that, and we'll film it." So because he got really excited over that, he's like, "Yeah, take the hen or take the chick." And thankfully, the family obviously wasn't going to do that. They contacted the sanctuary right away, and Edith made herself to her way here and has been the cutest little thing ever since. And now she's, I think, 6.5, I think. So she's doing really well. She's another Cornish cross. But yeah, crazy stories. You wouldn't believe the different things. Like, and I have to credit so many people in the community that are there and have these networks, so that when things like crazy stories like that happen, they have a place to go and people refer. Like we do have a good network, I think, here, so we kind of help each other and try to make things work. Yeah, sometimes humane societies, like I think Alistair said, we just try to do what we can. And everybody's like, we're not always looking to get more chickens. I was like, oh, I always am. I always want more chickens. The problem is trying to restrain that instinct, I guess, because gotta love them so much. But yeah, then you have to like let reality sink in, and that's the worst part. Is so hard. And yeah, constant intake requests is another thing. And now I think we all kind of dread this time of year because we know people are hatching, and how are we going to answer these emails if we don't have the space? It's very difficult. My dream is to have another group just for roosters. It's always been my goal, and I just actually do it. Yeah, that's but lots of different stories for sure.
Thanks, Tamara. I think, are we ready for the next question? I think, Hope.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. There's a lot of interesting content coming up in the chat here, particularly about, the backyard movement. And I know one of the things where I live that is of serious concern to our local sanctuary is the presence of avian flu. We did have an excellent presentation this morning from Dr. Crystal Heath about this topic in the broader sense with the industry at large. But obviously microsanctuaries are impacted by the avian flu as well. And we thought it might be an appropriate topic to address in this section. So let's start with you, Tracey, if you'd care to comment on how you've been impacted by avian flu.
Sure. Well, the first year that it was, I think when it first got here, it started off in the Northeast, and I was watching, but it moved faster than I think anybody thought it would. But I mean, I was grateful that I was connected to this community, and just also a little shout out to Alistair and the Microsanctuary Resource Community, or Microsanctuary Resource Center. And from the beginning, I think I understood that there were higher care standards than what most people think, thanks to Microsanctuary Resource Center and this vegan chicken sanctuary community, but so also being connected to that community, you know, we were all kind of on alert. And so I had started to make preparations before it got here. Primarily, you know, it's spread through these migratory waterfowl passing overhead and through their droppings. And then also like we can track it into, you know, the chickens' living spaces. So we had to cover all of our runs with like hard roofs, which was a, you know, again, like a major financial expense. But as soon as it got, you know, anywhere near us, and I can't remember when, you know, when we first, I feel like though it was like spring of, I don't know, maybe 22, something like that, where there were some cases in our flyway, because there are these different migratory flyways, and it started off in the eastern zone, which we're like more central, but at some point it was in our flyway, and so we knew it was coming, and so we covered all the roofs, and then adopted all these biosecurity protocols, like putting on little you know, boot covers before walking into any of the runs, and sanitizing our boots on a regular basis. And everybody went into like a real lockdown for like about a year, probably, I feel like. Although it does also in the summer months, right? The hot temperatures will kill the bird flu. And so I think the risk, you know, went down at some point, and we were able to let the birds out. But for months they were in lockdown, like they were in their, you know, their hard covered runs, and they weren't allowed. We didn't give them access to the larger yards. And then I think by the following year, again, they went back into lockdown as there were some cases nearby. I mean, it's something I monitor every day. You know, I have a Google search set up. So every morning I see the bird flu stories, and then also a couple different groups online where people, you know, like with some more scientific background are monitoring and tracking. So just kind of monitoring and tracking all the time to see where it is. Fortunately, we haven't had any cases like within the county. And so by that second year, I made the call to let them all out, knowing that there was, in fact, you know, still some risk, but then it was clear to me it wasn't going anywhere. And like, you know, their lifespans are not that long. And when it got into the years, I just made this call that, you know, I will continue to monitor. And if it gets real close, we will go back into our extreme lockdown. But for now, with just quality of life concerns, you know, they now all have access to their big yards. We do still sanitize you know, I don't drive the truck around the property. Anytime anybody comes onto the property, we sanitize boots, so that if we've tracked through bird flu while we were like walking around, you know, someplace else, we won't bring it onto the property. But you know, so there's still some kind of minimal biosecurity protocols in place, and then there's a lot of monitoring and fear, but also that balance, you know, trying to balance safety with quality of life, which is just, you know, kind of it's always a balance.
Right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and I just want to give a little time check. We've got about 11 minutes left for the entire thing, and I'd love to have time for a wrap up too. So so just keeping that in mind with your answer to this question. But go ahead, Fireweed.
Thanks. So yeah, Tamara, I don't know if it's how different it is in Ontario than it is from British Columbia here. We've got folks obviously listening in from the States and other communities where the regulations might be different. But out here, I know that if avian flu has been detected in a certain region, you know, there's these zones, and people with microsanctuaries are at risk of having authorities coming in and actually destroying all of their animals. This is a huge concern. So I think anybody thinking about starting a microsanctuary even has to be really up to date on this very concerning issue. What are your comments about avian flu and how you've been affected, or what are you thinking about it in terms of your sanctuary work?
Well, I hope to heck that policy doesn't exist here. I haven't heard anything, but now I'm just getting suspicious. But if in that case, I don't have any chickens, and they're all just going to hide in my basement, and nobody will have to know. Anyway, no, no, we did the same thing. Like, I had different shoes that I would change shoes all the time, and then, like you said, we slowly kind of graduated to like feeling like okay, but yeah, monitoring and keeping an eye on things. And I kind of feel like I'm slacking lately, because you almost kind of do get comfortable. So now that this question's here, I'm like, oh, I should be panicking more, I guess. But yeah, it is a whole balance about like quality of life and happiness. And it's so beautiful out. It would be so cool to keep them locked in. But yeah, think we haven't heard anything too much. Last I heard of anything locally was a few months back, but then again, is that because there's enough tracking, or is it the news just not caring anymore? Who knows? I'm not sure, but I haven't heard anything so severe as anybody coming in, but I don't want to be the one to say that that's what it is here. But yeah,
Right.
I'll let Alistair continue.
Sure. Go ahead, Alistair. Thanks, Tamara.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it definitely varies by your location and the regulations of the state that you're in, because there are both federal and state kind of policies on dealing with avian flu. But I mean, I think speaking just from personal experience running a chicken sanctuary, there really hasn't been anything that's affected our lives as much as avian flu since 2022. 2022 was a very stressful year for transitioning from having people having outside runs and just kind of going about their lives outside to being set up to be inside, especially during kind of like high traffic and high intensity times of the year. We're keeping a constant eye on it. We've really kind of transitioned to make sure that everybody that lives here has comfortable space that is not exposed to outside birds. And one of the things that we're kind of trying to keep an eye on is the evolution of avian flu over the years that's showing up in humans, showing up in dairy cows, showing up in other animals. It's really kind of a weird time right now because we don't quite know what's going to happen with avian flu as it evolves, but it is here to stay. And we really have been trying to encourage everybody who has bird residents to look at the best biosecurity practices for where they're at, and kind of what they're dealing with at any given time. But it's very hard to manage quality of life for your residents with the issues with the state that you're in. Like, we're in North Carolina, which is a very ag influenced state, and so us dealing with the state regulations and the state vet department is going to be very different from somebody else in a different state. And so we're very very careful about it, but like I said, it kind of can be different depending on where you're at. So but overall, I mean, I think it's something that we take very seriously, and we really have not seen anything that's so drastically changed just kind of how we go about thinking about running a chicken sanctuary than the avian flu since 2022.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. And Hope, I think we're ready to have a little break before your presentation this afternoon.
Well, yeah, we still have 2 minutes, so I wondered if you all would like to just wrap up real quickly with again what you're saying, where your sanctuary, who you are, what your sanctuary is, and how they can get in touch with you, or how people can connect with you. What's your best methods of connection? Tracey, you want to start that?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you just again for everything and for inviting me to do this. So Tracey Glover, my sanctuary is Sweet Peeps Microsanctuary. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and we have a website, which is just www.sweetpeeps.org. I'm on Facebook, Tracey Winter Glover. On Instagram is Tybell. And I would love to, for people to follow us and meet our residents. And yeah, you can learn like lots more about what life here is like through all of those places.
Great, thank you. Tamara?
Oh, so yeah, we're the Browns Microsanctuary on Facebook, but then on TikTok, I was like, they just basically took over mine. TikTok and Instagram is just Tamara Brown, and I should probably fix that. But yeah, we seem to do the best on TikTok and Instagram in terms of reaching a wider audience. So I'm not sure. So I kind of use Facebook as like the more kind of preaching to the choir thing, but then the other two I feel like I can use to get at like the non-choir, to try to to get people to see chickens as for who they are, not for how to use them. So yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Alistair?
Yeah, so you can find Triangle Chicken Advocates on Facebook. We also have an Instagram page at Vegans with Chickens. And then Microsanctuary Resource Center is on Facebook and on Instagram. And then we have websites for both. You can find me there.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you all so much for all that you do, for caring for all these beautiful, sweet beings, our beloved chickens. Thank you so much. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back with the next presentation, and that'll be me.